Oh, we're going to evolve.
We're already there.
Just remember, this is a good old place.
Hi, y'all. I just want to lay the groundwork for the day a little bit and then turn it over to Rep. Canfield to actually run the meeting. But we have about 6 hours today. That's an enormous amount of time to get really good work done. And was thinking that we have a lot of big decisions to make, but we also still have a few, I don't want to call them small decisions because they're very impactful, but we have some smaller in the grand scheme decisions to make as well today. And so given all the really incredible testimony we heard yesterday, Charlie and I worked with staff to make some amendments based on all of that. And then there's also some pieces of the puzzle that we haven't been able to spend as much time on as we would if we had, years to work on this bill. And so there's also language relating to just like what a next step is on something like, say, pre-K. That's a really important part of the system and the funding for the system, but we haven't had a chance to dig into. So we have essentially a new complete draft. Would love to essentially walk through that with all of the new language and changes in that, have everyone understand that, and then do a second round of going through the bill where we pause at each decision point and we make a decision at that decision point. Those are things like how much over the education opportunity payment should a district be able to raise, right? So those kinds of decisions we would sort of go through on a second round and make. I'm going to be here. I'm going to keep my camera off because I think it's like sort of disruptive for me to be too involved while we're on Zoom, but I promise to pipe up if needed. Bill's going to run the meeting. Charlie is going to be the fierce defender, forcing us to make decisions at decision points. Because today's the day. And then hoping to, wrap it all up with a bow at the end of the day by straw polling sections. Staff will have the weekend to make sure that our implementation dates line up. Likely there will be some tiny amendments from that because there always are. And with this extra time of the couple days, maybe we can avoid a pile of floor amendments on this, which is always lovely. And then so we could accept those amendments first thing on Tuesday morning and then vote on the whole bill. Also, given how hard this is gonna, how much thinking this will require, hoping we can just take regular breaks, every hour 15, every hour for just 5 minutes to refresh our brains and then come back in together. So that is my motivational speech for the day. You all are awesome. And I'm turning off my camera now.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So welcome. It's April 4th, 2025. You're at the Vermont House Ways and Means Committee. And that's St. James.
Oh, wow.
Jerry told you to relax, didn't he? Okay.
Good morning, Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel. I assume you want me to share my screen.
Yes.
Okay, so we've walked through the bulk of, we've walked through everything from House Education already. There have been some changes. It's highlighted. I would suggest we just look at the highlighted changes in what we walked through on Monday. And then there are some additional provisions that I've been working on, such as the special education language, some language about tuitioning, et cetera. Okay. So we're in the finding. So this is your first look at, I believe, your committee amendment, which is a strike, which you're recommending that the Education Committee's report be struck completely and replaced with all of this. So, we're,
And that was a choice because it would be way too confusing with referring to just sections of 454. This is a lot more cohesive, coherent.
She's okay with it.
Education's okay with it. As long as we don't totally screw it up.
Well, we tried.
okay, so the first section is findings and intent. The findings haven't changed at all. The intent section, there was some language added regarding career and technical education. So I'm on page 3, subsection B, subdivision 2, starting on line 10. This is the plan part of the intent section. So it is further the intent of the General Assembly to, in the 2026 session, enact new larger school district boundaries and enact updates to career and technical education governance systems, both at the local and statewide levels, that are reflective of the larger public education governance transformation to new larger school districts, that provide a coordinated and coherent statewide strategy for career and technical education that is responsive to the work board's needs, and that provides opportunities for more integration between career and technical education and traditional high school work for students who wish to pursue personalized learning plans that incorporate both types of experiences. And then on page 4, again, we're still in the intent section of what you all intend to do next session. Enact student-centered updates to career and technical education funding. So 2 was governance for CTE, 3 would be funding for CTE. Within a foundation formula that does not create competition between general education schools and career and technical education programs for available funds.
Representative Holcomb.
I'm just curious, will this, the way it's written, include a review of federal Perkins and implications of any changes in Perkins?
This is intent language for what you all intend to do next year. So that would be up to you all next year.
So we don't have to specify that, we just have to
No.
do that when you do it.
In fact, even if you specified it, you didn't have to do it.
Okay, thank you. Very helpful clarification. Thank you.
Representative Maslin.
Yes, thank you. I'm wrinkling up my brow with the word general education schools. I mean, aren't they all schools?
Do you have a better suggestion for me?
I don't have one at the moment, but I think there may be one.
I think so. I think I hear you and I will think about it. Let's move on.
Okay.
I am hoping to keep you guys on track to meet all of your goals, and I'm not sure that that is where you want to spend your energy this morning.
You're correct.
And I'm making dangerous assumptions here, so please tell me if I'm out of line. But it's a great point.
It is actually very
It's
important.
really key.
And also technical ed centers, they still have to help meet the graduation requirements.
Right.
You don't outsource that responsibility by going to tech.
Thank you for setting the pace for us. Good.
Be careful what you wish for. I've made a note, if any of you have a suggestion, I'm all ears at some point after I'm not in the speech. Okay, so no other changes to the intent section. Slight changes to the Commission on the Future of Public Education section, so that's section 2. No changes to the work of the commission itself. But language, again, regarding career and technical education for the subcommittee that's recommending the school district boundaries to consider. So we're on, I know, I'm sorry. Page 17, line 17. School district boundary subcommittee. So this is the subcommittee that's composed of the 5 new non-voting members of the commission that will determine the most efficient number of school districts and make those recommendations to you all. The school district boundary lines need to be based on educational research, Vermont's geographic and cultural landscape, historic attendance patterns, and then the new addition is the provision of career and technical education and a comprehensive analysis of school locations. So when they're coming up with their boundary proposals to you, they need to take all these things into consideration. And then in their duties, the charge on page 18, line 4, Subcommittee shall recommend not more than 3 school district boundary proposals to the General Assembly and may consult with the Vermont Association of Career and Technical Directors regarding how to incorporate career and technical education into the proposals.
Representative Holcomb.
So does this mean that we're tasking the subcommittee with coming up with CTE districts?
No,
So
I would
why,
say no.
why the more than 3? So this is the generic plan. So this is the overall plan for districts
Yes.
and then, okay,
And while they're coming up with those boundaries, they can consult Vacted.
text, okay.
Yep.
Just making sure it's not an additional set of boundaries. Okay.
Yeah, I think the idea is that it will be integrated, so we're trying to, what we had asked Beth to do, Commerce and us had asked Beth to try to make sure that career technical education was addressed as we're addressing everything else, because we're sort of making the assumption that we are not going to have these 2 separate systems.
That makes sense. What I'm concerned about is we're talking about the language is referring to it as a governance thing. There's a practice piece of this that I hope will be part of that conversation. I'll just leave it there. We have competing models of CTE in the state currently. I think they are right.
There's a hand on the screen.
Representative Kornheiser.
Thanks. Is there's on the, I'm going back just very slightly, I'm sorry. The pieces for the subcommittee of the commission to consider is the grand list,
No.
strength or equity on that list.
No.
I think we should add that. I'm sorry, I missed it.
So the proposed school district boundaries shall, or do you want just a consideration of what grand lists are?
Consideration, yeah.
Okay. So then I would suggest we put it up here in all of the educational research, the geographic landscape, historic attendance patterns, grand list values. Is that grand?
Yeah,
I don't know the
something
right
like-
words.
Equivalent grand list values, equitable grand list. I don't want to wordsmith it, but something like
Okay.
that.
I'm trying to figure out, like, there's so much concentration of opportunity and despair in Vermont currently. I'm trying to figure out how that would look in terms of both the size and the shape of districts. And is the assumption behind adding that we think we can't adequately account for that and how we distribute revenue?
It certainly plays into, if I may, Chair Kornheiser, I think it plays into, especially when we're talking about supplemental district spending, about the equity between grand lists. So it doesn't have to be the dispositive factor, but should be considered.
I wonder
Representative Odie.
whether we can offer the idea that school districts might not have to have contiguous, the towns within the school district might not have to have contiguous boundaries. If we're really going to, do
I
something about the grand list.
Beyond our scope.
think we should let them.
That'll be up to the commission.
Well,
Yeah.
hopefully they'll
Yeah.
think through.
If you want proportional representation on the school boards,
all that.
contiguousness is a must.
Yeah, okay.
It's just hard.
I can think.
I mean, I think there are harder barriers to contiguous that we're gonna have to get over. I think we got, I mean, I'm just thinking of my section of the state. Good luck getting to 4,000 without making it bigger.
So I'm gonna add some language and I'll phone a friend on the right language to use regarding consideration of grand list values. Okay. No other changes to the duties and work of the subcommission. And I am not, let's see. Well, okay. There was some, I added some clarifying language. On page 29, this is the section regarding prohibition on school closure and transition to paying tuition. So if a school district closes a school, this section would prohibit it from paying tuition for those affected students. It would either have to educate those students somewhere else in the district or designate 3 or fewer public schools to educate those students outside of the district. The designation statute currently only applies to secondary schools, so high schools. So I just added some language here to clarify that notwithstanding that, the designation law would apply in this situation. So elementary schools. And the chair of House Ed knows about this change. Then I understand you all got some feedback from the treasurer's office on the school construction program. Is that accurate?
Yes, the treasurer's office did reach out with some comments to Chair Kornheiser. She shared with me. I shared with the chair of House Ed in terms of the Aid for School Construction Advisory Board.
And
Should be configured. So it's technical changes mostly, but it seemed like that the treasurer's office had some comments saying, who calls the first meeting? Why is it the treasurer if the treasurer is in chair? Who provides administrative support? How long does this thing go on? And can you clarify how much money is appropriated on an annual basis and restricted to just debt service and not for an upfront payment? Those were the comments.
luckily, 2 of those comments were already addressed
So good.
in the draft as the treasurer's office had it. So that's confusing. So I'm not sure, all I mean by that is I'm not sure if I'm missing something there. Chair of the State Board of Education shall call the first meeting. I made that change under the meetings. It was previously the treasurer. You got to have someone call the first meeting. And so usually when I'm drafting, I'm picking kind of the highest level official to call that meeting, and then they can pick a chair. So I picked the state treasurer. This treasurer's office is suggesting that you have the state chair of the State Board of Education. That's a policy decision for you all.
That was Chair Conlon suggestion. Yeah.
Okay, great. Made that. The first meeting of the advisory committee has been moved up to September 1st, 2025. And oh, that's new. Okay, there's more new language in here than I realized. We did add the debt service language. That's in a separate section, but it looks like there's now a report due to you all and the education committees on recommendations for addressing the transfer of any debt obligations from current school districts to future districts as contemplated by Vermont's education transformation. And that report would be done by the advisory committee, and it would come to you all in January of 2026.
December 15th, please.
That's right.
Okay, we'll make that change.
Thank you.
2025.
Yes, 2025. Okay.
And we have page 42. We are in section 14 of the bill, which starts on page 37, the approval and funding for school construction projects. This is another change suggested by the treasurer's office, and that is to just be clear that the state aid would not be a lump sum of 20% of the overall cost of the project. It would be an annual.
I'm sorry, Beth, could you say that one more time?
Sure. It sounds like the feedback you received was there was a concern that without specifically stating that school construction aid would be awarded annually, that there could be an assumption that the eligible amount over the lifetime of a project could be given in a lump sum. So it's an annual.
That achieves what they decided.
Representative Odie.
Then a question I have is, do we have to be more specific than that, like in installments over the course of a year?
You certainly could. That would be a policy choice that, to my knowledge, has not been contemplated yet.
Well, I think that's a good idea.
So that
To be awarded in installments over the course of each year. annually in installments.
Shall be awarded in annual installments then?
No,
In annual installments?
that's already there. Amounts will be awarded annually in quarterly installments, something like that. Or,
I'm gonna phone a friend and ask John, who's our school construction expert over here.
So John Gray, Office of Legislative Counsel, I would say that the draft contemplates, but didn't include language to specify that the funds would be awarded annually, so it makes sense to add language like this. There hasn't been an investigation as to how you would do that across the course of a year, and I don't think right now we're gonna resolve how to do that, and this is probably not the space to spend your time and how much you're trying to get done, right?
Keep going.
Yes.
Okay. Very helpful comment regarding section 18 of the bill, starting on page 44, the amendment to section 828, the tuition to approved schools. Subdivision C here requires that in order for a school district to be able to pay an approved independent school tuition, that approved independent school would have to have at least 51% of its student enrollment composed of students attending on a district-funded tuition basis. As passed out of House Ed, it said on July 1, 2025, and hopefully kiddos aren't in school at that time. So we have during the 2024-2025 school year. Then we can jump to all new language. So those are the only changes to the House education language. We're gonna go to page 52. And I would say it's more than fair game for you all to be thinking about where some of this new language should live. The way we've drafted it right now is that the sections that I was responsible for drafting went at the top because I was responsible for the top language. But if you think this language fits better somewhere else, we can move that as we're making our changes. So think about the cohesion of the bill. This is an amendment to section 823 in Title 16, which is currently the elementary tuition statute. There's also a corresponding high school tuition statute. What this does is say that effective July 1, 2029, which would be your future state, which according to the plan you've laid out in this bill would be when your new school districts would theoretically be going operational, and your foundation formula, that tuition would still be paid by the district in which a student is a resident, but that the district would no longer be paying the tuition charged by a school or the average announced tuition. The district would be paying an amount equal to the base amount, and I need to work on the cross-reference there, multiplied by the weighting factors applicable to each individual student pursuant to section 4010 of this title for each resident student attending the receiving school.
Just one comment. I think we might want to say adjusted by the weighting factors. Because otherwise,
By the weighting factors,
Yeah.
okay,
because we don't want to think that it's multiplicative on each weighting factor.
got it. Adjusted by, okay. And since this would apply to all grades K through 12, we're getting rid of the word elementary. It's just now the tuition statute. You're repealing all the rest of the statute because there's no longer an option to authorize higher payments to schools. And there would be a repeal of the high school tuition statute because it's now covered by just the general tuition statute. And the language, the law about maximum tuition rates, notice of tuition rates, and tuition overcharge or undercharge.
Representative Holcomb.
How does this relate with the special tuition applied to certain students with disabilities currently? Does this supersede that as well?
No,
Because if we're shifting to a weighted
I have not been.
special ed, we'll have to repeal the establishment of a special ed tuition.
Yes, I think once you figure out what you want to do for special education funding, then there's an entire chapter that we'll need to go through with a fine tooth comb and either make adjustments to it or repeals to it. But that this is for general education tuition. And I will just note, this change would be for your future state funding. But the tuition program is the contemplation of a district paying tuition to the school of a student's choice has not changed in this draft at all. That would be a future state decision.
Something taken, and it's an effective, controlled by the effective date.
This change that we're looking at on page 52 would not take effect until July 1, 2025.
Yes.
But there are other statutes before this statute in Title 16 that talk about the mechanics of the tuition program, which, based on the conversations you all are having, would probably need to be updated based on your policy choices for how education is provided in your new larger school districts. So I am just flagging for you that this change to tuition is just to the funding piece, not to the programmatic piece of tuitioning.
You're talking about which, if the school district is making the payment or the state is making the payment? No.
No, so theoretically, if you move towards larger school districts, there is a large chance that there will not be a single school district that does not operate K through 12 schools. That is not the case now. There are school districts that do not operate any schools or some schools. And those are the schools under current law that are allowed to pay tuition. So if you change what a district looks like, if you change the fact that a district now operates all those schools, but historically there were some areas of the district that tuitioned, that would not be accounted for under the current law. And so I'm just flagging for you all that with this change, the funding change in this section, there would likely need to be policy decisions made once you move to your future state regarding what tuition looks like, or even if it is a thing anymore.
Once we have the districts.
Yes, yes.
And I'm sorry to pick on this, but this is an example of where we need a belt and suspender, because the way this is written and because this is so far out, we may have special education weights in there. So those are the weights that we're adjusting on the individual student level. But we have a ton of work that has to be done around that chapter. So I guess what I would just respectfully, how do we make sure we do that work? Like, how do we put that on the radar for House Ed that they have to actually do that work so that we can get to this? Because if we go forward with this and we aren't committing ourselves to doing that work around other revisions to that section of Title 16, then people are in trouble.
When you say other revisions, do you mean like the tuition?
Yeah, I mean, if we're waiting, we have to remove, for example, the ability of schools to set their own tuition rate, which is what they're doing just for students with disabilities.
Right.
Otherwise.
In order for the state to create new school districts, they're going to have to you all are going to have to start kind of from scratch on the duties and responsibilities of those school districts and how they provide the education for their resident students. And those would be the policy choices that would be, I believe, would be debated as you're creating the new school districts next year.
So we merged a lot of districts during Act 46 and this never came up. You could merge districts and never touch this issue, is what
I don't believe so under the Constitution. I think there would be a common benefits clause issue to have a school district that is providing tuition opportunities for some students and tuition. I don't think this is the best.
So I see what you're saying. I'm worried about the special ed piece.
Yeah.
And I hear where you're going, so I hope it comes up. I'm just saying, because we sometimes don't, and then we come back and desperately try to fix it. That's all I'm saying.
If I am still your education policy attorney next year, I will certainly be bringing it up.
Thank you. That's all I want to hear. That's all I want to hear. As someone who has had to implement laws that were internally contradictory.
Representative Odie, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just want to say, again, the use of the word general education, I think it is actually very important for funding purposes to know what we're talking about there. So I just wanted to say, I hope we go back to at some point between now and when we wrote this out. When we have a chance.
Representative Holcomb.
And I would say I have a concern about that because general ed is actually the responsibility of all schools, including the therapeutic schools. And the reason we've had a problem in Inspire is the therapeutic school didn't understand its first job was general education. That's a serious, serious flaw in our current operation.
So we have to do something about that.
General education happens everywhere, so I think we have to be clear on that.
Yeah.
Okay, we're gonna move on. Out of tuitioning.
Okay.
This is for the moment. Don't worry, I dream about the tuitioning statutes at night. It's never, you're never going to escape me bringing it up. Adult education funding, this language you all passed in the budget, the House version of the budget regarding adult education payments. It's not highlighted because our editing team had already edited it, so we didn't highlight it for them. But it is new to this draft. And I don't know who made the request to include it here, but there was a request to include this language from the budget here. And I'm happy to walk through it if you'd like me to, but if you're all, oh, I'm seeing, okay. So this is an amendment to section 4011. In Title 16, education payments to subsection F. It requires that the agency of education make that there be an appropriation to the agency in an amount equal to 26% of the base education amount for each student who completes the diagnostic portions of an adult education secondary credential program based on the average of the previous 2 years. And then the secretary would make payments to local education and literacy providers based on the funding formula contained in State Board of Education rules, which is essentially a weighting model. So if you meet certain factors, you get a certain amount. And if you meet other certain factors, you get a certain amount on top of that. And that is it. And then there would be a funding report due back to you all from the Agency of Education to update the adult education funding system, make recommendations on what that should look like, and then a requirement that the Agency of Education shall negotiate in good faith to extend existing contracts with local education literacy providers for the term of 1 year, and shall endeavor to maintain the terms of existing contracts to the greatest extent possible, to keep the status quo, to give everyone a chance to figure out what it should actually be.
Do you
Folks,
expect?
I asked for this to be included because the Commerce Committee had worked on it and put it in the budget, and there are so many pieces connected to the education fund that are going to need more work next year, and I just wanted to make sure that those were all in one place so that we could track them for our follow-up next year.
Do we expect this will be included in the December 1 letter?
No.
It is. It's gonna come up as part of ed spending in the December 1 letter, because K-12 schools will have to raise money to fund this, as well as adult dual enrollment, which is mentioned here.
But Bill, no, it wouldn't be a specific line in the December 1st letter, if that's why you're asking.
Thanks. Oh, Representative Feltus.
Representative Kornheiser, the reason that Rebecca and I brought this up in the first place, yes, it does exist in the budget and it's fine in the budget. My concern was that the original language we saw from John had a description using the term categorical, referring to some of this, and we just didn't want that confused with the other categorical stuff. So the fact that this is here is okay, as far as I'm concerned, as long as it doesn't get confused with some other categorical stuff later on.
So do you think this fixes the problem you were trying to solve, Representative Feltus?
The problem we had before was that the original language in our K-12 transformation bill referred to this as a categorical aid, and we didn't want that to happen, but I don't see that.
That's addressed here. That's addressed here, because it used to say categorical.
Right,
It's up
right.
here.
Okay.
And I think what this does is say this is a 1 year fix.
Right.
So that we can figure out what to do with this next year.
Correct. That was the intent. We just didn't want a conflict between the language that was in the budget, which is right here, and the at one time proposed language for this bill. And that's been corrected.
Okay.
But yes, it will be a single letter,
Bill has suspenders.
As it is now, you know.
Okay, so the next section is special education, and this is,
One other question on
Oh.
this, on page 55. So the underlying portion, which is all new, stretches out into the 40%. So on line 6, is that correct? I mean, so what was the percentage before?
it was 40%, but it was part of a sentence and I needed to capitalize it,
Okay.
so.
Fine.
The 40-60 change was made last year.
Okay, thanks.
and that's actually a bigger percent than the number of K-12 students involved.
Section 31, page 56 is a slimmed down version of the special education language that we walked through earlier in the week. So it starts with a report from the Agency of Education to you all. On or before September 1st, 2025, the agency is required to submit a written report to the House Committee, to the Education Committees, and the Money Committees, addressing the factors contributing to uncontrolled growth in extraordinary special education reimbursement costs. The report shall include detailed information regarding the current state of special education delivery in Vermont, including an update on the implementation of special education changes enacted pursuant to Act 173. The report shall include a description of the current state of support for students with disabilities in Vermont and recommended changes to structure, practice, and law with the goal of improving delivery of special education services and managing the rising extraordinary special education costs as Vermont's special education finance system transitions from a census block grant to a weight for special education costs. I'm on page 57. Ensuring better, more inclusive services in the least restrictive environment in a way that makes efficient and effective use of limited resources while resulting in the best outcomes. Responding to the challenges of fully implementing Act 173 and the lessons learned from implementation efforts to date. Ensuring that the delivery of special education is responsive to student needs, and addressing drivers of uncontrolled growth of extraordinary expenditures in special education. The report shall include an analysis of the costs of and services provided for students with extraordinary needs in specialized settings, separated by school district operated specialized programs, independent nonprofit programs, and independent for-profit programs. The report shall include a geographic map with the location of all specialized programs within the state, as well as the following information for each individualized specialized program. Disability category served, grade level served, number of students with an IEP, and the average duration of each time each student spent in the program over the last 10 years. On page 58, average cost per pupil inclusive of extraordinary spending and any costs in excess of general tuition rates, years of experience, training, and tenure of licensed special education staff, review of the findings of all investigations conducted by AOE, and a review of the agency's public assurance capabilities with respect to special education programs in all settings, and an analysis of the effectiveness of current oversight or rule and recommended changes if needed. The report should also include an evaluation of the state of implementation of Act 173, an identification of drivers of accelerating costs within the special education system, identification of barriers to the success of students with disabilities, description of how specialized programs for students with extraordinary needs operated by school districts, independent nonprofit schools, and independent for-profit schools are funded with an analysis of the benefits and risks of each funding model, an assessment of whether Vermont's current special education laws ensure equitable access for all students with disabilities to education alongside their peers in a way that is consistent with EQS and the right to a free, appropriate public education under IDEA, a review of the capacity of the agency to support and guide school districts in the effective support of students with disabilities, as well as compliance with federal law, which shall include a review of reports of investigations in all of those various settings in the previous 10 years and an evaluation of what practices could reduce adverse settings, an assessment of the ability of the state to ensure resources are used in the most efficient and effective way, a review of pending and recent federal findings against the state or school districts, as well as progress on corrective actions, a review of the agency's staffing and capacity to review and conduct monitoring and visits to schools, especially in pet settings, I'm on page 60, a description of the process and status of reviews and approvals of approved independent schools that provide special education and therapeutic schools. That should probably be programs. Oh, no, I think that's fine.
That is.
Recommendations for whether the agency has capacity to ensure timely review of approved independent schools and provide sufficient oversight for specialized programs in nonprofit independent schools and for-profit independent schools. Recommendations for needed capacity at AOE to provide technical assistance and an analysis of whether more strategic support for better primary first instruction and more successful implementation of Act 173 needs to be in place for the foundation formula to move forward with a weight for special education. And if warranted, a review of options for changes to practice structure or law to ensure students are receiving access to quality education in the least restrictive environment in a cost-effective way, including a review of possible role of BOCES, the impact of larger school districts. So that's the report to you all. Then page 61 requires the Agency of Education to come up with a 3-year strategic plan for the delivery of special education services, which should include unambiguous measurable outcomes and a timeline for implementation. The plan has to be informed by the analysis and findings of the report we just walked through and provide the supports and processes that need to be in place for the transition to a weighted funding model for special education to succeed, including a suggested transition timeline with benchmarks for success. It also needs to include contingency recommendations for special education funding in the event that federal funding under IDEA goes away, or it transitions to a system that requires more planning and management on the part of the state to ensure funds are distributed equitably. They have to share that report with you all, or their strategic plan with you all by December 1st, 2025. I'm on page 62 now. And then for the next 4 years, they have to report to you all on the progress of their strategic plan. And then there is one position here in section 33, new permanent classified position to support the development and implementation of the 3-year strategic plan and a $150,000 appropriation from the general fund.
Sorry. Thanks first.
Right.
Hey,
I just, a couple of questions and concerns. I haven't heard anything from the agency in regards to how doable this is by the deadline. I thought originally there was $50,000 in here for payment for the people that were going to be on study committee. And again, how realistic is it to find out information in regards to independent for-profit schools, nonprofit schools, and so on? This is overly extensive to me, and I haven't heard anything from the agency whether or not they even think.
They have to collect it by law anyway. This is all data they have. There's no study because we took out the panel, so there's no oversight panel anymore. But what they got is a position to take the data they already are sitting on and follow up and put it into a report.
So when did the study piece come out?
Between the last version and this version. It's not in this version. In response to your feedback. And the stuff on superintendents is also all gone.
Okay. All right, thanks.
So we're trying to be responsive to your concerns.
Representative Wazazi.
Is the money for this position, is that assumed to be in that chunk of money that the budget set aside for transformation?
There is no appropriation dedicated for this particular section of the bill. So it would have to be approved by appropriations.
But they do have all that money set aside in the budget. You're right, Representative Wozniak. And
Right, yeah. Oh, yeah.
I just want to be like, and maybe everyone's already clear on this, but like the problem we're trying to solve here is the extraordinary special education costs are one of the fastest growing costs in the education fund. And we need something in this bill to address that, to begin to address that, especially if we're moving to a weighted special education.
Yeah, I might comment, it's just in the word uncontrolled, which is on pages 56 and 57. it seems like it's out of control. But I don't know if we need that word instead of just the road.
Just take it out, just take out the word.
That's my only comment on wordsmithing in this particular section. I agree with the intent.
Got it. And then I think that's it for me. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
It's a good time for us to take 5.
Sure.
Can I just ask a question before? Charlie, do you know how that worked, uncontrolled got in there?
I think it was always part of the original draft. Yep.
Right.
It's
So,
my
in from the committee.
No, it was,
It was in the original.
Right.
So you know, I agree with taking adjectives out. Yeah, statute shouldn't have adjectives.